LSP alumni and alumni. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to our Lunch and Learn interview. This interview is being recorded in October of 2021, and October is Domestic Violence Prevention Month. However, abuse occurs outside the domestic sphere as well. And my guest today, Ms. Alia Salem, will tell us about her mission to help Muslim communities to recognize this problem, its scope and severity, and to put into effect practices and procedures to hold themselves accountable. Ms. Salem is the founder and executive director of Facing Abuse in Community Environments, FACE. Her professional background is in communications, organizational development, and community organizing. Ms. Salem has been serving Muslim and other marginalized communities at the local, state, and national level for the past 17 years, and is also a co-founder of Action for Palestine. She is a proud Roddenberry Fellow alumni and a Dallas Public Voices Fellow with the Op-Ed Project. She's a published writer and public speaker, and her work has been featured on most major media outlets globally. She's a graduate of UT Arlington with a degree in interdisciplinary studies, with her three focuses of study being in communications, sociology, and religion and culture. And so without further ado, I'm going to dive right in. Alia, I would like you to tell us how you became aware of this problem and sort of the background, what happened, what was it that caused you to decide there really was a problem and to decide you needed to do something about it.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me. I was, in 2017, I had stepped away from a different position that I was working in the community as the executive director for a local civil rights nonprofit. And the community knew me as somebody who did work on behalf of the community, was an advocate, especially for women. And so I received a phone call from a woman that I knew. First, it was a Facebook message. And she told me that her daughter had been abused by their imam and that she needed a female advocate for her daughter because nobody seemed to understand what was happening. And it was at that moment that she explained to me what had gone on in the way that she knew how, with the words that she could articulate the issue. This young woman had been basically what we now know was groomed since she was 14 years old by her religious leader at her masjid. She was in a very close familial-esque relationship. It was very much a relationship of trust and care and compassion and all of these things as a young woman. And then when she became of age, and I mean, at 18, this individual inserted himself as a possible romantic partner and proceeded in that way until a sexual relationship had been formed.
What was the age difference approximately in this particular case?
He was 18 and he was in his late 40s.
Okay, so when he started grooming her, he would have been in his early or mid 40s. So there was a good 20 plus year age difference.
Correct. And, what we now know is what is immortalized in our first report, which is against the religious leader Zia ul-Haq Sheikh. And that really formed the foundation, because when I got involved my background is in organizational development, how do you sum up that degree that I have, right? I basically do organizational development and grassroots organizing and community work. But in organizational development, one of the first things we do when we're trying to problem solve and create processes and procedures is do a needs assessment. And immediately there was nothing in our community that could do anything. I found some organizations in the non-Muslim sector that were advocacy oriented, but nothing outside the criminal justice system
Mm.
that could engage in any form of community accountability, figuring out, getting to the bottom of what happened. And then the biggest issue was preventing this individual from, getting fired, because we almost immediately got him fired.
Mhm.
But then he went on to the next mosque down the street
Mm.
and was, trying to get another job. And I was playing whack-a-mole, trying
Mhm.
to have those secret backdoor conversations that, hush hush, to try and help them understand what was happening.
Mm.
And at that point, that was when it solidified for me
Mm.
that we got to do something. And so that was really the impetus for creating something that was beyond advocacy work, that was starting to chip away at the accountability gap that existed amongst leadership in the Muslim community.
Mhm. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me, I mean, the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of focus on the Catholic Church's lack of accountability, how they shuffled predatory priests from one parish to the next. And whenever it became too hot to hold them, they'd move them on. But they never, ever divulged why these priests were being moved around.
Yeah.
And that's what it reminds me of. It's the same kind of thing. It's like, okay, we don't want to create a scandal. And so we'll just quietly move this person on without taking any accountability for the next community that this
Mhm.
predator lands in.
Exactly. And the really interesting part about this is a conversation I have a lot in with respect to creating a hierarchical structure within a decentralized community, which is, how the Muslim community in the US operates right now. And
Mhm.
in this decentralized community, it's got its set of challenges, right? And everybody thinks, oh, well, we need, an oversight body that adjudicates these cases from a communal perspective based on Sharia. And the way that, right, the Catholic Church has the canon courts and Jewish courts have the halakha courts and blah, blah, blah. So we see the interesting dynamic with the most hierarchical sort of structure that exists, certainly within the US, is the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
And I mean, it is so regimented, right?
Mhm.
And that didn't prevent it. And
Mhm.
so it really has solidified, and we're coming up on our 5th anniversary in 2022. It really has solidified from just, really getting at the root of this problem, is that it has nothing to do with whether you're hierarchical, whether you're decentralized. It has to do with the community culture that exists and whether or not you, as a community, and why I named it Facing Abuse in Community Environments, is the responsibility of the community itself as a whole
Mhm.
to have and develop the culture that needs to exist to root out this corruption and to clear our sacred spaces from this sort of abuse being rampant and being able to flourish, what we're seeing right now.
Mhm. And I mean, Karama is all about addressing issues in the Muslim community from a Muslim perspective. And it sounds like, I mean, as we're seeing now in Afghanistan, when you try to impose top down an American idea about women's rights, et cetera, what you get is wholesale rejection of the entire idea. And that's really not what you're about. It doesn't sound like. So let me ask you this. Given that you are trying to address these issues within the American Muslim community and from an Islamic perspective, how do you go about it? How do you find out about these things? How do you proceed to make contact with affected communities? And what kind of services or ideas do you try to introduce to them about how to deal with this problem in in an accountable and transparent way?
I am so glad that you asked me that question, because One of the very first tools that we used is the article on the Karama website about Sitr and about the covering of sin. What is one of the biggest problems that exists is the misunderstanding around transparency for people to come forward, but also to protect people who have abused or protect an institution. And what people don't, and what we are so thrilled to get to be on the front lines for, is this excavation of and bringing into the forefront these, either obscure, misunderstood, or just not known hadith, proper terminology and context about certain issues like the covering of sin, 70 excuses, et cetera, right? That's like really one of the big ones, is keeping it quiet, right? Because people automatically think, oh, we're supposed to cover this up. We can't talk about this. There's so many verses about not speaking evil, but getting to be part of the movement that is understanding how to deal with abuse. I mean, there's plenty of other organizations who have come before us. We're not reinventing this. We just get to be part of it, right? And we're excavating these concepts in hadith that help us really understand what is the prophetic model for dealing and engaging in accountability work. And so these sorts of tools that exist, there's a plethora of them, and there is so much great work that and great concepts that are becoming part of our contemporary lexicon, right? Not just what has gone to the annals of history and kind of sort of been never looked at again. We're having this treasure trove that only academics know about, right? Academics and scholars that are looking at some of these scriptural exegesis and Quranic exegesis and all this kind of stuff, that they know about it, but because our organization and a few other organizations have a grassroots component to their models, mm-hmm. we're pushing it out to the masses in order to impact that cultural change that mm-hmm. we need to happen. And so I think that's one of the most exciting pieces of this work, is we are really starting to put muscle behind these concepts and leverage them in a way for the community that they can latch onto and have these talking points. Because a lot of people know in their heart it's wrong, right? They know in their gut it's wrong. Mm-hmm. They know they shouldn't be keeping it secret, but they don't have the language or the tools to be able to speak truth to power. And we're another tool that's coming in like a bull in a china shop to just disrupt that status quo. And so that's one of the most exciting parts of the work that we get to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just said something very interesting, which is the bull in the china shop response. So what has been the community response to FACE's work?
The bull in the china shop was not intentional, but it's perfect, right? Because in some ways, when you're coming into a very delicate situation and we're trying to find a way out of this, right? And that's what a bull in a china shop is doing. He's not trying to break glasses.
He's just trying to find a way out.
Just trying to find a way out. And so there's that initial, crash and everything that happens, which, in the Muslim community looks like us coming in and doing something that people are very uncomfortable with for the most part. Even people who love this work are like, "Ooh, ooh," you're exposing like your professional. I thought that was just for, you know, social media people to be all dramatic. And we're coming in and saying, no, we actually want to do this professionally. We want to do this in a very, as ethically as we can and continue to refine this process. And so there are these, there is a certain amount of trauma that comes with doing this work that we recognize. We always talk about trauma as it's something to avoid.
Mhm.
And it is for the most part. But at the same time, and maybe it's just my limitation on words, but trauma is inevitable when you are engaging in this type of work or any type of work that really disrupts status quo. There is almost always unintentional or even uh, intentional trauma that has a purpose that is very difficult to cope with and comes to terms with. And I'll give you an example. When we release reports like this, we almost always get a call, especially, I'll never forget the first report we released. And this random person who I did not know called our phone number and was asking me if it was real. It was a man, and he was asking me if it was, is this real? Is this true? And he was beside himself with grief. And he said, this was my imam, and this is somebody I trusted. And are you sure? And like asking these questions really sincerely, but crying on the other side of the phone. That's trauma. He has been traumatized, and we contributed to that. And so there's this, that bull in the china shop reference where people's hearts are getting broken. And we want to recognize that, and we're working in ways that try to reduce the vicarious trauma that exists, the direct trauma that might happen, et cetera. But at the same time, if anybody's going to be, in the vicinity of a china shop and watching a bull go through it, there's also this sense of awe and wonder at the disruption that's happening, the power that disruption has, and the sort of it's a peel back, if you will, at the devastation, right? So all of a sudden, we see just how fragile this community is. Just there's no protections in place for these pieces of china, that exist, and these delicate, these delicate sort of frameworks. And this creature has just come in and devastated. And that's part of that is an abuser, but part of that is somebody who's coming in and trying to address these issues. That analogy is probably going to bite me in the butt one day, but I think there are a lot of like takeaways from it, in that's what we're seeing in the community. A lot of heartbreak and exhaustion because it's starting to happen more frequently. People are getting empowered and they're coming forward, and on a weekly basis, it feels like almost that someone is coming forward, and then even publicly, and that's a whole nother concept. And then on the other side, there are people who are just like, whoa, like, I didn't even know this was a problem. Oh my gosh, it feels like everything's breaking. This is amazing. But at the same time, oh my God, so it is all of that. It's all of those reactions all happening at the same time, which is a lot for a beleaguered community who's already been at the forefront and the target, the bullseye of one of the biggest, institutions of power, i.e. the state. And we've already been so targeted. And so people are like, really, Alia, really, you have to go.
Is this the time to be doing this?
Really? Yeah, exactly. And I'm just like, I mean, it's the thing is that's the most often thing that is cited for why not to do this, right? Is you want to bring the negative attention directly onto, show what we're actually doing wrong. Like, stop yourself. And I said, look, the talking point is in terms of just media, forget the moral portion of this, that it is our obligation, right? That we're commanded to deal with this. Forget that for a second. The media talking point is, okay, this we know from a pattern of decades and decades and decades that this type of stuff comes out no matter what.
Yep.
How it comes out and how we respond to it changes the game.
Mm-hmm.
There's either, okay, the Boston Globe comes in, does a big investigation, finds out all the dirtiness, and uncovers this stuff, and basically splattered it all over the news. And of course, there could be some good people working on that, but at the same time, it's for advertising dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what the media do. Journalism for sake of journalism is going the way of the dodo. But if we are part of the solution, if we're the ones who are cleaning house, there's a different story to be told. There's, look at what those Muslims are doing. Look at how they're cleaning house, how they're taking care of business. Because if anybody has, any marbles in their brain, any cognitive thinking skills, they know that this happens in every community.
Mm-hmm.
They know that. That's why Islamophobes, like, there's been a couple of articles that, gave us pause because they came out of right-wing media that are like, exploiting blah, blah, blah. But it's almost negligible, right? It's just the trolls that have nothing better to do in their mother's basement.
Yeah, they'd be doing that sort of stuff for anything anyway.
Exactly. And so there's a few of that kind of thing, but it doesn't rise to the level of creating a firestorm. And so it becomes this story where we're really starting to take care of business, and the Muslim community is doing groundbreaking work. We've in a sense created a discipline of work that didn't exist before.
Mm-hmm.
This is not only new to the Muslim community. Our model as it stands, I mean, investigations happen all the time, but the model in which we do it in, with the interdisciplinary approach that we do it in, does not exist. Doesn't exist in the way that exists from a third party perspective that's outside of the institutional power, right? All of the investigations that have, or organizations that do investigation work, exist with financial remuneration from the institution that employs the abuser.
Yeah.
So
conflict of interest.
100%. And the people do not control the information. And one of, we are completely disrupting that model as well. And so this is the talking point becomes, completely different for people, and how we talk about this issue and why it's okay to bring it out in the open.
So it seems to me that although you do advocacy, you're not primarily a victims advocacy group, although you may hear about specific situations from people directly affected. Your actual work is advocacy to the Muslim community about the importance of cleaning up their act, and then providing them with tools. And maybe, do you have like a best practices manual that you're working on? Like, how do you suggest that communities proactively, before something blows up, take steps to actually institute practices and procedures?
That is, that's another great question. The biggest the biggest mistake of my career doing this work. I really bit off more than I could chew, but I see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, Rabbil Alameen. Oh my God. Talk about over promising and completely under delivering. When we first started doing this work, it was immediately clear. People were like, when you go into a community and you start exposing people, they're like, oh yeah, well, yeah, that, and what do we do to, stop it and fix it? And when I tell you, I sound like a broken record when I say, we're creating a code of conduct and it's coming, I've been saying that refrain for multiple years.
4 years.
And so my poor little heart can't take it anymore, because I bit off way more than I could chew in that regard. However, it is what we have out there is not, in our assessment, is not sufficient to really give people something to latch on to. You have got to spoon feed it to them. You can't give them these broad concepts. You have to give them an absolute template that is ready to go. You just tweak a little bit of it and they can turn it. So we are in the, dear God, in the last stages of creating this this monster of a code. And it talks about everything from a leadership perspective, and it goes through not only why this needs to exist, like it gives people a lot to work with in terms of why, and making, passionate statements about, how I will stand up, and, a pledge that they can take. But then it goes into hiring. It goes into, like, what are the responsibilities around picking a good candidate to begin with? What are the responsibilities around people within the community, like how they treat each other, that form the basis for prevention? In that, for example, if you don't monitor how people talk to each other, if you don't pay attention to the respect that is exchanged within a communal environment, for example, there have to be standards by which we even communicate with each other. Because once you create a toxic work environment, and this is really the key, nobody addresses toxic work environments from the leadership perspective. If we don't create mechanisms to protect the imam from the boards, for example, and to protect the imams from other imams and associates from imams, and so on and so forth. And then we talk about counseling, and we talk about all these different frameworks of leadership within the environment. It goes through the whole experience. And alhamdulillah, because our team is made up of a plethora of individuals who are not only subject matter experts, we have fought and cried and bled for this community in the communal environment. So we all know what are the weaknesses and the weak points that we need to, address and talk about. And so that code is meant to address that. But then on the end part, what do you do if a violation of the code happens, right? That's also something that's never discussed. What is the methodology? How do you employ face tactics into your own community? I mean, we're two people. We've got a third person who's helping organize us, but we're two people against 4 million people with Canada that are trying to address this issue, right? And there's no way, like, let's train some people, so this code is going to, inshallah, is going to be turned into training that's going to be available for certification processes. And that's literally my background. My background is training and development, and creating, training and learning opportunities for people to digest information, use as a part of certification practice, and so on and so forth. So that is our biggest tool. We also have a community response toolkit that helps individuals when we have the other part that happens is when we expose something, people are like, oh my God. And they're in their own community,
Mhm.
and they are not part of leadership, but they don't
Mhm.
want these people in their community, but nobody's doing anything about it. Like,
Mhm.
what do we do? And they're not, professional grassroots organizers. They're just lay people who are like
Mhm.
moms,
Where do I start?
dads.
What do I
Yeah,
do?
exactly. And so we give like an entry level framework for somebody to latch on to, few templates, things like that that they could take away, and of course resources at the was it links to all the organizations that we work with or
Mhm.
know about that have something to do with this, and that was actually just released this past week, so that
Oh,
was really
mashallah.
exciting. Yeah.
I need to take a look at that. So that what you're saying is, again, music to Karama's ears, because part of what we do is we educate women about the equity that exists within Islam between men and women and
Yes.
encourages them to become leaders. So that brings me to the leadership question. And that is, in my experience, and obviously I don't have as much experience as you do, especially after 4 years of the work that you're doing, most of the mosques that I know of are run by a leadership committee, which is very top heavy with men, with a few sisters who do things like social events, you know. But and a lot of them actually run the programs, but they're not on the boards. Okay.
Correct.
So to what extent is your recommendation to people to really think about putting more women on the mosque boards on a parity with men? Because in most cases, these instances of abuse are
Hmm.
normally by an imam, male,
Hmm.
against members of the community, normally female.
Hmm.
Okay. So,
So in terms of formal sort of programs or things like that, those don't yet exist within FACE's model, mostly because we have our hands full with just the accountability piece. However, what we are
mhm,
doing with FACE, and it is very intentional,
mhm,
is modeling what an organization looks like. I mean,
mhm,
we're not the only ones. So
mhm,
don't let that, what I'm about to say, make it seem like, we're breaking barriers. There are women who have broken many barriers before us. But we are contributing to the organizations that exist that are women led, that are survivor led, that are part of a group of organizations that are operating and showing very unapologetically what it looks like to be on the front lines of community work and showing how to address some of these issues from a female perspective, but also to elevate organizations like Karama, like FYI, which is woman led, like Peaceful Families, which is woman led, Hurma, Heart Women and Girls. All of these organizations are woman led and they are flourishing
mhm,
or doing groundbreaking work that is serving the community in tangible ways that truly fill needs gaps, right?
mhm,
They truly, I got to grow up and learn from Dr. Hind Jarrah, who is in the Dallas community,
mhm,
trailblazing leader,
mhm,
not just a woman leader, trailblazing leader.
mhm.
And the way that just she unapologetically came in there and told everybody how it needed to be. And it's just common sense, folks.
Mhm,
And because of her rich knowledge and background and expertise and you name it, and just her confidence, mashallah, she came in and basically level set, which allowed other females in our community to all of a sudden become leaders and
mhm,
be able to push back and be able to say, no, we're community leaders too. Like the
mhm,
five of us that are at the umbrella meeting of all of the organizations, and there's five of us women who are like
mhm, mhm,
sitting there all by ourselves in one little group. And now it's just expanding, right? And
Mhm.
so there are people in organizations who have set the bar, number one. And number two, when we are coming in, we are bringing other women with us.
Yes.
Like this isn't work that is territorial. This
Mhm.
is work that has to be done in community. This is
Mhm.
work that cannot be done alone. It cannot be done in the silo. Like we've got our thing, we're doing our thing, we're, operating in a way that makes sense for what we're trying to serve the community with. But there's so much more to it. Like face is a spoke in a wheel. It's not the
Mhm.
wheel, right?
Mhm.
It's just one spoke. And there are, if we don't bring along the other organizations, because if, for example, if face gets any modicum of agency, exposure, whatever, there are 10 organizations, 15, 20, 30 organizations over here
Mhm.
that are doing this work in a different capacity that need to be brought along. I'm an interdisciplinary by education, but also
Mhm.
just by nature.
Mhm.
And when we talk about these issues, I guarantee you, if Karma didn't exist and didn't have some of the frameworks
Mhm.
that help us shape the minds and the lenses at which we look at some of these issues, face would not be where we are today. I just messaged Rahma a couple of days ago because I was on the Karma website doing research, as I was just like one of my first go-to places.
Mhm.
And I was doing research, and there was some stuff on the website, and uh, I'm literally combing through because this is information that's accessible to me. I
Mhm.
don't have books and books and books. I'm
But
not
unknown to the community because
unknown.
you're kind of a conduit. You're sort of spraying this information out as you go.
Exactly. It's exactly. And so when I say bringing women along with us, I mean bringing the work of other women, bringing them and their voices to this work, this platform, trying to sort of, if you imagine like a coachman and a carriage and a bunch of horses, we are all horses that are trying to pull this
In the
train,
same direction here.
and we all have these reins, right? And if we stay strong and those reins lead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have that spiritual cohesion that we need, and we all work together. If we're not working together, then what even is this, right? So we have to not only model it, but we have to bring our other women along with us, because we have not had the opportunity to really show this community what women can do, what women are made of. Like we're starting to. There's sparks. There's,
Oh, yeah.
certainly in my lifetime, we've got good stuff. But I mean, if you look at it from a higher level, sociological view, this is just the beginning, right? This is just, the generation before mine and my generation within the US and Canada. This is it. This is the spark. And so we want to continue, keep that flame going. One of our mottos, and my personal motto, is that it doesn't take anything from a candle to light another flame. I heard this from somebody else. I didn't come up with it, but it's solidified in my mind in such a concrete way that this is not territorial work. Like there's very little of our work that's proprietary, which is why we share it mostly online, right? And so if we can spark somebody else, or we might take a flame from somebody else because ours is dimming a little bit, that's how we're going to get through this. And so, looking at it from that perspective, I think has really helped.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting talking to you because you are taking a very generous community-centered or based approach, which is non-proprietary, which is based on the idea of networking, bringing people in rather than trying to hog the field all for yourself, which I think is really wonderful. So I have to say, when Karama was first established, one of the things that I always thought was that the United States, and I guess Canada too, needed some kind of an institution, kind of a finishing school for imams, because back in the 1980s and 90s, most imams were imported from abroad. I used to like to say they were fresh off the donkey. They may have had excellent Islamic credentials, but had very little understanding of life in North America, let alone some of their actual legal obligations about reporting instances of abuse, etc. Most of them were completely clueless about all of that. And I mean, I do see that over the years, different imam, there are now imam networks, but I still think it would be really great to have some kind of a program that,
yes.
A structured program that taught imams what their duties are, and then maybe an adjunct program that basically also provided this framework for mosque leadership structures to figure out what the appropriate structure of accountability but fairness is between the mosque and the imam. So I guess there's just a huge amount of work still to be done. How exciting.
Yes. Oh my goodness. When I tell you that the imams that I have spoken to are themselves thirsty for a professionalization and a compliance-oriented model that professionalizes their work, I would be understating it entirely. The desire for there to be, and there needs to be, when I talk about hierarchy, it makes it sound like, that's not something that should happen. It should happen, but it can't happen in a silo. It can't happen outside, in its own like little close-knit thing. It has to happen with organizations like FACE and Hurma Project and Peaceful Families Project and right? And Heart Women and Girls and Karama and so on and so forth. You have to create these mechanisms where the right people, the people with the knowledge, right, of Islamic theological Shara'i principles can say, yeah, this guy's got it, or this one's got it. Like they're on it. Their aqidah is good, blah, 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 right? And then you have the groups that are like, but does this person know what mental health principles they need to employ? Does this person know from a social work perspective how you need to engage? Does this person understand what being trauma informed is?
And what their legal obligations are, and which will vary state by state about the requirements, the reporting requirements in all these different areas.
Exactly. One of those our flagship training program called Safe Sacred Spaces literally talks about that, that talks about what to do when somebody who is a child or part of a vulnerable protected population is abused. When you're made aware of it, what do you have to do? People, looping in the people who are doing prison reform and abolition work and criminal legal system disruption work, etc., bringing them in. They're a huge part of this conversation, right?
And they have important experience and practices, like best practices, to contribute to this ongoing discussion.
100%. People think that the criminal legal system is the way, right? Like that's how we get, and I'm like, absolutely not.
That's at the end of the process that has gone wrong. What we want to do is help people to avoid having to involve the criminal justice system because they've fallen down on their accountability responsibilities earlier in that chain.
And we know the percentages, especially when we're talking about sexual assault. We know the percentages of how many actually see the inside of a courtroom, much less have some sort of, punitive measures for, substantiated allegations.
And minuscule.
Minuscule. And so what are we left with, right? We're left with somebody who raped a woman, and he's walking around because they didn't want to come forward, understandably did not want to come forward, because we
Because
don't
of the
believe
opprobrium that falls on women
it's like this
anytime they
nasty,
open their mouths.
yes,
Yep.
vicious cycle. And trying to help, that's something so basic, Dr. Sada, is that the idea of what it means to believe women. Like, people think that we're just going to run rampant and, believe women even if they're lying. And I'm like, you don't understand what believing women or believing survivors means, because 11% of our victims are male. And so it's not only when it's overwhelmingly women are victims. However, this is a whole community issue. And if we don't start to pay attention to the professionalization of the profession of imams and religious leaders, and we don't start to set compliance standards that exist
and then enforce them.
My God, rules are only good if you enforce them.
Exactly.
A lot of people don't even know that Peaceful Families Project has annual imams training that goes through this. It is, from everything I know it to be, and talking to Selma, the type of stuff that is taught there is so essential for an imam to be able to do, or a chaplain to be able to do their work, or a religious leader or religious counselor or what have you, to be able to do that work and have a safe space to talk about these issues, to raise the problems, because there's this other part that we don't pay attention to, especially for men. And it's the ability to not know it all, right?
To be humble about the fact that their life experience is so different.
Yeah.
They can't understand a lot of where women are coming from if they don't listen.
Well, it's not just that, though. It's let them have a safe space to be, to not know.
To say I don't know.
To say I don't know, and to not be looked at as less than. There's such a burden on mashayikh and chaplains and scholars, women and men, but especially for men, that the burden to know everything and to be this all-encompassing leader, and they don't even have the tools. It's not fair to them either. We have to resource them and equip them and pour into them in a way that prevents them from one of the biggest causes of getting into boundary violations at the low end. Not all of these people are sociopaths.
No, most of them are well-meaning individuals.
And boundary violations often occur when an imam or a leader of any kind is so overwhelmingly stressed that they either engage in practices they don't know, or they're trying to cut corners or whatever because they don't have resources, and they're trying to make stuff work. And so they might take a shortcut here that not ethical, right? Or they use harmful coping tools that might lead them into spiritual crises, health crises, mental health crises, etc. And they take these paths that start to build a resilience to harm, right? A resilience to harming others, right? That's why grooming is called grooming, right? It's stages, and you build up the resilience to, and if you had started with, a high level of transgression, people are, oh, stop, right? I mean, some people are vulnerable to it, but if you start with, and that's what you see a lot of times with the abuse cases, it starts with words, and then a light touch, and then a
hug, maybe that goes on too long,
or being alone in a car one time, or a room, and it just gradually builds until these well-meaning individuals have found out that they can get some relief and coping tools, and they have, over looked their responsibilities and their amana that they have taken on the mantle of, and now find themselves in these states, and doesn't excuse, must be held accountable. But at the same time, it can explain how we got here, right?
It sounds like accountability with compassion.
Correct. Yes, yes. But a lot of, I get called the Imam hunter on a regular basis.
And what do you hunt them with? A carrot?
I guess our computers, I don't know. But the best one was calling me Buffy the Imam Slayer, in one group, which is, based off of a TV show.
Yeah, I used to
And
watch
I was like,
that.
yeah, I was like, oh, she's the good person.
That's
So
right,
just
exactly. That's
FYI.
Yeah.
But people think, the reason I mention that is because people think that Face is out here to get imams. And I'm like, no, we need.
Most imams are very good people who don't transgress. The real problem is, what do we do with the problem imams?
When I tell you, there are imams who are desperate for a way to make Face work, like it is a big jump for a lot of people. So most of them are only talking to us behind the scenes. But when I tell you they are tired of addressing their colleagues, transgressive behavior, most of them are book nerds. Most of them are complete book nerds. And what they want to be doing is, combing through the Quran and bringing up these beautiful ayat and helping people understand and, counseling and this, that, and the other thing. Most of them do not want to be cleaning up after their colleagues. And when a lot of our allegations of abuse come from imams.
Right.
We had a situation in Windsor, Canada, that a whole group of imams, a council, had tried to, get rid of this guy. And it was these, rogue boards that were like, and just brushing them off. And they're having these victim-centered, when I tell you the stuff that we see is wild. We have these imams who came together and said they're, outlined the victim-centered nature of how we needed to look at it and why this person was harmful for women, harmful for the youth. And we're like, he has no competency. No, he should not be employed. Literally said this.
Right.
And they ignored them. And so they came to Face because they were like, look, we've tried all the things to do this and avoid a public scandal. But you know what? And still, the guy's still employed. Like, look how stubborn our community is. But this stuff takes time, right? It's let's do this and then follow up. It's not just about releasing a report. It's about releasing a report and empowering the community to say, no, we don't want you here. Or the way the state of our hearts is and our community is we're okay with that. We don't believe you, ladies. We don't believe that this is, if they're not going to believe a whole group of imams and a community-centered organization that was brought in to do this, then God help you all. That is truly what I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means when he teaches us that he will not change a situation of a people until they change what is in themselves. And that's at the crux of Face work. We are working to change what is within ourselves and shift that culture away from reputational and institutional protection and towards the benefit of the doubt and the protection of victims in the community. If we don't do that, all is lost, truly.
Well, and I don't think we'll ever reach 100%. That's essentially never going to happen. Since you're from the South, when you were talking, the thing that came to my mind, because my grandmother was from Georgia, is bless your soul, for which the Islamic equivalent is Allah yahdihum.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you've done everything you can, all you can say is Allah yahdihum and move on to people who are actually listening. So speaking of listening, this is a time at the end of the interview, because I'd love to go on forever, but we do have to bring it to a close. Is there anything that you particularly wanted to share with our audience today? I think Rahma has a little slide to share. Tell us. Okay.
So I think it is absolutely critical that people know that FACE is an organization that is here to help. We're not here to harm. We're not here to hurt people. Some of this stuff is very difficult, but we're an open door. That phone number, you can either call us, you can text us at that number, email us, you name it. We love answering the phone. Most people harbor these misunderstandings about FACE because they don't even bother to ask us a question. You would be surprised. We're so on social media and we love to respond. That's number one. And number two, if we do not all get involved with this organization and try to take a piece of it and try to bring it into your own community, help fund it. We don't take, a lot of organizations go into Masajid and what have you and raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. We don't do that. We have a conflict of interest against holding them accountable versus taking donations. We're building fees for service that we might, Masajid can do, not investigations. Investigations will always be
independently funded.
Independently funded, but we're building in sustainability mechanisms. However, if we're going to try to do this professionally, meaningfully, and build it out in terms of not just this, minute focus that addresses, maybe one or two aspects. If we want a professionalized, sort of process that covers a whole variety of components around this, but just at the basic level to try and fund this work, our organization is facing a moratorium right now in that we had to stop taking cases because we couldn't get to all of them. And so we have a backlog of 40 cases that we have stopped taking cases in order to at least try to do justice to those cases that we've already agreed to do something about. And so that is a stark reminder with respect to what we are capable of. Like, we want to also be responsible. We can't be telling people we're going to do this work or do an investigation
if you don't have the capacity to do it.
Yes, exactly. And so we're trying to hire at least one, hopefully two full-time investigators. Like, the need is there. Having an outreach person who works only on curriculum development and getting out into the community. Those are key pieces for us to be able to build out these organizations, but we can't do it without community support. And what kind of executive director would I be if I didn't make a call to action at the end? But those are two of the biggest pieces that this is, we're approachable. We are an organization that wants to do this together. It's going to take all of us to have a piece, whether it's inviting FACE to come do training at your facility or seek assistance in implementing your own processes and procedures, whether it is working with us to help get the message out to your community about FACE, whether it is upholding the reports that we release and helping people understand this issue, whether it is asking us questions and getting to know us better, or it's helping to fund and sustain this work. We need everybody's support. It's something that will take the entire community. And why we called it Facing Abuse in Community Environments is that we all have to face this together. And our guiding hadith is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that Allah will not punish a community for the sins of an individual unless they see evil spreading among them. And while they have the power to stop it, do not do so.
Nothing.
And if they don't do that, if they don't stop it, then they will be held accountable. They will be punished along with the sinner. And that is, it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up when I heard it, because I was like, oh, you mean this is a fard kifaya? Okay, thank you so much.
These are your marching orders.
These are I read that in an academic book that was published. It's a phenomenal book. It's on our community resource toolkit. And it brought out this, this hadith that talked about leadership. It was a textbook on leadership in Islam. And it brought out this hadith, and I was like,
It's exactly what you've been saying.
Yes.
And now it's something that you can support Quranically or Islamically, because you actually have, the text and the commentary on our duty not to cover up evil, but go forward and deal with it.
And we've only scratched the surface. That's what's wild about this. We've just scratched the surface.
Oh, mashallah. God give you strength.
Ameen, Ya Rab, ameen, ameen.
Thank you so very much for coming on this program today and sharing all this information. And people, we are stronger when we work together. So yes. for everyone, what we're trying to do here at Karama is to amplify the voices and the work of organizations like FACE. And then Alia has also done a shout out to other organizations we work with, like Heart Women and Girls and so on. We really are stronger when we address these issues together in community, but nothing can get done if we don't take on the responsibility of supporting these organizations. No one is telling you to pay $1,000, but please support Karama, support FACE, support if you have a local women's shelter or a local organization that provides, this kind of help to members of the Muslim community, become a part of the solution, because otherwise you're part of the problem.
That's right.
So thank you very much, Alia. We will talk again soon, inshallah.